58 BC, a Helvetii encampment near the Saône River, central Gaul. The chieftains of the migrating Helvetii tribe gathered in council, confident that their 368,000 people could cross Gaul unmolested by Roman interference. Their scouts had reported that Julius Caesar, the newly appointed Roman governor of Transalpine Gaul, commanded only 4 legions stationed hundreds of miles away near Geneva. The distance alone guaranteed safety. No army could march that far quickly enough to matter. The Helvetii migration would take weeks, moving slowly with families, livestock, and all their possessions. By the time Caesar learned of their movement and mobilized a response, the Helvetii would be deep into southwestern Gaul, far beyond Roman reach. The tribal leaders laughed when scouts described the stone roads Romans were building through their southern territories. The roads seemed like monuments to Roman vanity, perfectly straight, unnecessarily wide, paved with fitted stones, as if the roads themselves were buildings. What purpose did such elaborate construction serve? Gallic warriors traveled cross-country when necessary, following animal paths and river valleys. Building permanent roads seemed like wasteful Roman obsession with order and permanence, the kind of impractical luxury that would drain resources better spent on warriors and weapons. What the Helvetii chieftains didn't understand as they planned their route was that those stone roads weren't decorative. They were strategic infrastructure that fundamentally altered the mathematics of military movement. On those roads, Roman legions could march 25-30 miles per day with full equipment, maintaining that pace for weeks. Cross-country through Gaul's forests, rivers, and rough terrain, armies typically managed 10 to 12 miles per day. The roads meant that Roman forces could cover distances in days that would take other armies weeks. More critically, the roads meant Romans could predict exactly when their forces would arrive at any destination, allowing coordination of multiple legions converging from different directions. 3 days after the Helvetii began their migration, Caesar's legions appeared on their flank, having marched over 200 miles from their bases near Geneva. The Helvetii scouts, who reported the impossible Roman arrival, brought news that shattered tribal confidence. Roman engineering had made their army effectively teleport across hundreds of miles of Gaul. The mathematics of strategic mobility were being written not in marching speeds or logistics calculations, but in the engineering specifications of roads that reduced friction, eliminated obstacles, and created predictable transit times that allowed military operations impossible for armies without similar infrastructure. The roads the Gauls laughed at were about to teach them that in warfare, logistics determines what operations are possible, and superior logistics can make the impossible routine. The story of how Roman roads revolutionized military operations begins with understanding both the engineering sophistication of Roman road construction and the military doctrine that made roads strategic priorities rather than conveniences. Roman roads were not simple paths worn by traffic or rough tracks cleared through forests. They were engineered structures built to precise specifications using techniques that wouldn't be matched in Europe for 1,500 years after Rome's fall. The construction of a typical Roman military road began with surveying. Roman engineers, called agrimensores, used specialized instruments to lay out roads in the straightest possible lines. The groma, a cross-shaped surveying tool with weighted plumb lines, allowed engineers to establish right angles and straight sight lines. The dioptra, a more sophisticated instrument, measured angles and elevations. Using these tools, Roman surveyors plotted road routes that ran straight across terrain, deviating only when absolutely necessary to avoid impossible obstacles like cliffs or rivers. The straightness wasn't aesthetic preference, but practical calculation. A straight road was the shortest distance between 2 points, minimizing travel time. Straight roads were easier to maintain because there were fewer turns and curves where drainage could fail or materials could shift. Straight roads were easier to defend because sight lines were clear and ambush points were fewer. The Roman obsession with geometric precision in road layout was fundamentally about military efficiency. The actual construction was sophisticated engineering. Roman roads were built in layers, each serving specific structural functions. The process began with excavating a trench along the surveyed route, typically 4 to 6 feet deep and 12 to 20 feet wide, depending on the road's importance. This foundation trench was called the fossa. The excavated soil was piled on either side, creating raised embankments that improved drainage and made the road visible from distance. The bottom layer of the road was the statumen, consisting of large flat stones laid directly on the excavated soil. This foundation layer provided structural stability and prevented the upper layers from sinking into the ground. Above this came the rudus, a layer of broken stones, rubble, and gravel mixed with lime mortar. This layer was typically 12–18 inches thick and was carefully compacted to create a solid base. The third layer was the nucleus, consisting of finer gravel and sand mixed with lime or clay to create a cohesive surface. This layer filled gaps in the rudus and created a smooth substrate for the final surface. The top layer was the summum dorsum or pavimentum, consisting of carefully fitted polygonal stones, typically basalt, granite, or other hard stone, depending on local availability. These paving stones were cut to fit together tightly with minimal gaps, creating a surface that was smooth, durable, and resistant to water erosion. The total depth of a completed Roman road was typically 3 to 5 feet from bottom of foundation to top of paving surface. The engineering specifications seem excessive until one considers the loads these roads carried and the centuries they were expected to last. Roman roads needed to support not just individual travelers, but military columns of 5,000 legionaries, plus pack animals, wagons carrying siege equipment, supply trains with hundreds of carts, and continuous traffic over decades or centuries without major reconstruction. The drainage system was crucial to longevity. Roman roads were built with a slight crown. The center of the road was higher than the edges by several inches. This camber ensured water ran off the road surface to drainage ditches on both sides. The ditches, called fossae, were typically 3 to 4 feet deep and ran parallel to the road. Culverts and drains carried water under the road at low points. The engineering prevented water from pooling on or under the road surface, which would cause frost damage in winter and erosion during storms. The width of Roman military roads was standardized at approximately 12 to 20 feet for the paved surface, wide enough for 2 carts to pass or for a military column to march in standard formation. Secondary roads might be narrower, but strategic military routes maintained consistent width to prevent bottlenecks that would slow troop movements. The consistency of width was itself strategic. Roman commanders could predict exactly how long a column would take to traverse any section of road because they knew the road would be the same width, same surface quality, same grade throughout. The milestones that marked Roman roads were both practical and psychological tools. These cylindrical stone markers, called milliaria, were placed every Roman mile, approximately 4,850 feet, slightly shorter than a modern mile. Each milestone indicated the distance to major cities in both directions, identified the emperor during whose reign the road was built or maintained, and sometimes noted the local official responsible for that section. These milestones served multiple functions. They allowed travelers to calculate journey times precisely. They helped armies coordinate movements by providing exact reference points, and they reminded anyone using the road of Roman authority and permanence. The construction costs were enormous. Estimates suggest a mile of road cost approximately 100,000 sesterces to build, roughly equivalent to the annual pay for 200 Roman legionaries. A major military road spanning 200 miles would cost 20 million sesterces, a staggering sum that would strain any ancient state's finances. Rome built these roads anyway because the strategic value justified the investment. A road that allowed military forces to respond to threats in days rather than weeks, that enabled trade and taxation, that facilitated administrative control, that projected Roman power through physical presence in the landscape. Such infrastructure was worth whatever it cost. The scale of the Roman road system reveals the commitment to this infrastructure. By the height of the empire in the 2nd century AD, the road network exceeded 250,000 miles, more miles than the modern United States interstate highway system. At its peak, the network included 29 great military highways radiating from Rome across Italy, major arterial roads connecting provinces, secondary roads linking smaller towns, and local roads extending the system into rural areas. Every region under Roman control was connected to this network. The construction and maintenance of this system required massive organization. The Roman military provided much of the labor. Legionaries built roads during peacetime as part of their duties. The military skill with engineering served dual purpose. Roads facilitated military operations, while the construction itself maintained troop discipline and provided practical training in engineering. Local authorities were responsible for maintaining roads in their territories, funded through local taxes. The central administration coordinated the overall network, ensuring that strategic routes received priority for maintenance and that new construction served military and administrative needs. The strategic doctrine that drove Roman road building was based on clear military principles. First, roads enabled rapid concentration of forces. Multiple legions stationed in different provinces could converge on a threatened area within days if roads connected their bases to the crisis point. Without roads, coordinating such movements was nearly impossible because transit times were unpredictable and armies arriving from different directions at different times could be defeated in detail. Second, roads enabled rapid response to threats. Rebellions, invasions, or political crises required immediate military presence. An army that could march 25 miles per day on roads versus 10 miles per day cross-country could reach a crisis in less than half the time. This mobility meant Roman forces could suppress rebellions before they spread, intercept invading armies before they penetrated deeply into Roman territory, and project power to distant frontiers. Third, roads enabled supply and reinforcement of frontier garrisons. Armies stationed on the Rhine or Danube frontiers or in distant provinces like Britain required continuous supply of food, weapons, equipment, and replacement personnel. Roads allowed supply convoys to move predictably and efficiently. A wagon train could travel 15-20 miles per day on roads versus perhaps 5 to 8 miles cross-country. This tripled the effective supply radius and allowed frontier armies to be larger and better equipped than logistical constraints would otherwise permit. Fourth, roads enabled administrative control. Officials could travel quickly to investigate problems, collect taxes, deliver orders, and enforce Roman law. Tax revenues could be transported safely to regional centers and then to Rome. Census data could be collected and reported efficiently. The physical infrastructure of roads made the administrative infrastructure of empire possible. The contrast with non-Roman territories was stark. Celtic Gaul, before Roman conquest, had no engineered road system. Travel followed traditional routes, river valleys, ridgelines, and paths worn by generations of traffic. These routes were seasonal, becoming impassable in winter or during wet seasons. They varied in width and quality, with narrow sections creating bottlenecks. They followed terrain rather than direct routes, adding distance to journeys. Most critically, transit times were unpredictable because conditions varied with weather, season, and maintenance. Gallic armies moving through their own territory could manage perhaps 10 to 12 miles per day in good conditions. In poor weather, through forests or rough terrain, or when burdened with supplies and followers, that dropped to 5 to 8 miles per day. An army marching 200 miles cross-country through Gaul required 20 to 40 days, depending on conditions. This meant Gallic military operations were fundamentally local because moving armies long distances consumed so much time that strategic opportunities would pass before forces arrived. The Roman conquest of Gaul under Julius Caesar between 58 and 50 BC demonstrated road advantages repeatedly. Caesar commanded initially 4 legions, later expanding to 10 legions plus auxiliary troops. These forces operated across Gaul, a territory roughly the size of modern France, confronting tribes that often outnumbered Roman forces significantly. Caesar's army succeeded partly through superior training and equipment, but equally through superior mobility, enabled by roads in Roman-controlled territory and by Caesar's understanding of how to exploit mobility advantages. The campaign against the Helvetii in 58 BC exemplified road-enabled strategic mobility. The Helvetii, a Celtic tribe from modern Switzerland, decided to migrate westward across Gaul. Their planned route would take them through Roman-controlled territory south of Lake Geneva. Caesar, as governor of Transalpine Gaul, roughly southern France, had 4 legions stationed at various locations. The Helvetii numbered approximately 368,000 people, according to Caesar's account. Probably exaggerated, but certainly a massive migration that moved slowly. Caesar initially had only 1 legion, the 10th, immediately available near Geneva. He needed to prevent the Helvetii from crossing into Roman territory while he assembled his other legions. Using the 1 legion available, Caesar conducted delaying actions that forced the Helvetii to seek an alternative route. This gave Caesar time to march his other 3 legions from their winter quarters across northern Italy and southeastern Gaul, distances exceeding 200 miles in some cases. The movement of these legions demonstrated Roman road advantage. Caesar's legions marched from their bases through northern Italy on Roman roads, the Via Aemilia, Via Postumia, and connecting routes. Then through the Transalpine province on roads built during earlier Roman expansion. These roads allowed the legions to maintain march rates exceeding 20 miles per day, despite full equipment loads. Each legionary carried approximately 60-80 pounds of personal equipment: armor, weapons, shield, entrenching tools, cooking equipment, and several days' rations. The Roman marching column was organized for both speed and security. The legions marched in standard formation with scouts ahead, vanguard of 1 cohort, 480 men, main body of 6 cohorts, baggage train in the center, protected by 3 cohorts, and rear guard of 1 cohort. This organization allowed the legion to deploy rapidly if attacked, while maintaining good march speed. The predictable road surface meant soldiers could maintain formation and the column could move as a single unit rather than stringing out over miles, as happened when marching cross-country through varied terrain. When Caesar's legions converged on the Helvetii position, the tribal leaders were shocked by Roman arrival speed. They had calculated, based on normal cross-country march rates, that Roman forces would take weeks to arrive in force. Instead, Roman legions appeared in days because roads had made 25-mile daily marches routine. The Helvetii found themselves confronting concentrated Roman forces before they had traveled far into Gaul, forcing them into battle on Roman terms. The Battle of Bibracte followed, with Roman legions defeating the much larger Helvetii force through superior training, equipment, and tactics as discussed earlier. But the battle occurred only because Roman roads had enabled Caesar to intercept a migration that should have been unstoppable through sheer numbers and head start. The strategic mobility that roads provided was as decisive as the tactical superiority that Roman training provided. The campaign against the Germanic chieftain Ariovistus, later in 58 BC, demonstrated road mobility advantages again. Ariovistus commanded a large Germanic force that had crossed the Rhine and was establishing control over parts of central Gaul. Caesar marched his legions from the Saône River valley to confront Ariovistus, a distance of approximately 200 miles. The march took roughly 8 days, an average of 25 miles per day, because much of the route used Roman roads through the Transalpine province. When Caesar's legions arrived, Ariovistus was surprised by the speed of Roman movement. The Germans had expected more time to consolidate their position. Instead, they faced Roman legions that had marched the equivalent distance from Paris to Geneva in just over a week. The subsequent battle saw Roman forces defeat Ariovistus decisively, driving his survivors back across the Rhine. The victory was possible strategically because roads allowed Caesar to concentrate forces before the Germans could, prepare adequate defenses. The next year, 57 BC, Caesar campaigned against the Belgic tribes of northern Gaul. These tribes formed a coalition to resist Roman expansion, assembling forces that Caesar estimated at 300,000 warriors, almost certainly exaggerated but representing a formidable alliance. The Belgic tribes calculated that their northern territories, far from Roman bases, would be difficult for Romans to reach in force. They underestimated Roman road building as part of military operations. Caesar's legions marched north into Belgic territory, and as they advanced, they built roads. The Roman practice was to construct temporary military roads during campaigns. These weren't the elaborate, multi-layered structures built for permanent use, but rather cleared, graded routes, adequate for military traffic. Even these expedient roads dramatically improved march speeds compared to cross-country movement. Roman legions extended their road network northward as they campaigned, creating infrastructure that supported their operations and that would later become permanent roads, incorporating Belgic territory into the Roman system. The Nervi tribe, considering themselves the most warlike of the Belgic peoples, planned to ambush Caesar's legions while they were making camp. The Nervi assumed Romans would be vulnerable during the hours required to construct a fortified camp. But the ambush failed partly because Roman legions could deploy rapidly from march formation to combat formation, even when surprised. The training that emphasized drill and discipline meant legions responded to the ambush by forming defensive positions immediately, using terrain and their organizational structure to create cohesion despite tactical surprise. The battle was hard fought, but Roman discipline and training prevailed. After defeating the Nervi, Caesar's legions returned to their winter quarters. A march of several hundred miles accomplished in days rather than weeks. The ability to campaign across Gaul throughout the campaigning season, then return to bases quickly, meant Roman forces could accomplish in 1 year what non-Roman armies would need multiple years to achieve. The strategic tempo enabled by road infrastructure allowed Rome to conquer Gaul in 8 years of campaigning, rather than the decades that such conquest would otherwise require. The construction of new roads throughout Gaul accelerated as Roman control expanded. Each conquered territory was immediately integrated into the road network. Military surveyors plotted roads connecting the new territory to existing Roman roads. Legion engineers and local labor built these roads to Roman specifications. Within years of conquest, Gaul was crisscrossed with Roman roads that fundamentally altered the region's geography of power. The Via Agrippa, built shortly after Caesar's conquest, demonstrated the scale of Roman road construction in Gaul. This network of roads radiated from Lugdunum, modern Lyon, to all corners of Gaul. The main routes ran from Lyon to the Rhine frontier, to the Atlantic coast, to the Mediterranean coast, and to the Channel coast. These roads totaled over 1,000 miles of engineered construction, completed within 20 years of conquest. The investment was enormous, but justified by the military and administrative benefits. The military benefits were repeatedly proven. During the revolt of Vercingetorix in 52 BC, the last major Gallic uprising against Roman rule, Roman road infrastructure proved decisive. Vercingetorix united numerous Gallic tribes in coordinated resistance to Rome. His strategy included attacking Roman supply lines and avoiding pitched battles where Roman training advantages would prove decisive. Instead, the Gauls would use their knowledge of local terrain to harass Roman forces through ambush and raid. The strategy worked initially, but Roman roads limited its effectiveness. Supply convoys traveled on roads where ambush was more difficult because sight lines were clear and because Roman military doctrine included securing road routes with garrison posts and patrols. When Vercingetorix occupied the hill fort of Gergovia, Caesar besieged it using roads to bring up siege equipment and supplies. When the siege failed and Caesar withdrew, he used roads to retreat rapidly to friendly territory before Gallic forces could cut off his line of retreat. The climactic siege of Alesia demonstrated road logistics enabling operations impossible without infrastructure. Caesar besieged Vercingetorix in the hill fort with approximately 60,000 Roman troops. A Gallic relief force of perhaps 250,000 warriors assembled to break the siege. Caesar's position appeared untenable. He was outnumbered 4-1 by the relief force while simultaneously besieging Vercingetorix's army. But Roman supply lines on roads allowed Caesar's forces to be fed and equipped despite being surrounded. Supply convoys traveled from Roman-controlled Gaul to Caesar's position using roads that Gallic forces couldn't effectively interdict. The siege succeeded, Vercingetorix surrendered, and Gallic resistance collapsed. The victory was partly due to Roman fortification engineering, Caesar built elaborate siege works, and partly due to tactical superiority in combat. But the operation was only possible because roads allowed sustained supply of an army operating hundreds of miles from its main bases while facing overwhelming enemy numbers. Without roads, Caesar's position would have been logistically impossible to maintain. After the conquest, Roman roads transformed Gaul economically and culturally, as well as militarily. The road network facilitated trade, allowing goods to move efficiently between regions and to markets in Italy and other provinces. Agricultural products from Gallic farms could reach urban markets. Manufactured goods from Gallic workshops could be distributed widely. The economic integration enabled by roads bound Gaul to the Roman economy, creating prosperity that reduced incentives for rebellion. The roads facilitated Romanization, the adoption of Roman culture, language, and customs by conquered peoples. Roman officials, merchants, teachers, and veterans settled in Gaul, traveling on roads. They established colonies that became centers of Roman culture. Gallic aristocrats traveled to Rome on these roads, were educated there, adopted Roman customs, and returned to spread Roman culture. Within generations, Gallic elites spoke Latin, adopted Roman law, built Roman-style cities, and considered themselves Romans. The physical infrastructure of roads enabled the cultural infrastructure of empire. The military effects extended far beyond Caesar's campaigns. For the next 400 years, Roman roads in Gaul enabled rapid military response to threats. When Germanic tribes raided across the Rhine frontier, Roman legions could march to intercept them in days. When internal rebellions occurred, Roman forces could concentrate from multiple provinces to suppress the uprising. The roads meant that Roman military power could be projected throughout Gaul continuously, making effective resistance nearly impossible. The engineering specifications that made this possible were remarkable by ancient standards and wouldn't be matched until the modern era. The cambered surface that shed water, the multiple layers providing structural strength, the drainage systems preventing water damage, the standardized width and grade. These were sophisticated solutions to real engineering problems. Roman roads lasted centuries with minimal maintenance because they were built correctly initially. Many Roman roads in Europe remained in use through the medieval period, and some routes are still followed by modern highways. The contrast with territories outside Roman control demonstrated road value repeatedly. Germanic tribes beyond the Rhine, Celtic peoples beyond the frontiers, Parthians in the east, all these peoples had limited road infrastructure and consequently limited strategic mobility. Their armies moved slowly, could not coordinate movements of forces from different areas effectively, and could not project power far from their home territories. When these peoples fought Rome, they faced opponents who could concentrate forces rapidly, could supply armies at great distance, and could operate with strategic tempo that non-Roman forces couldn't match. The economic costs of road construction were justified by the cumulative benefits over centuries. A road built in 50 BC would still be in use in 400 AD, providing 450 years of military, administrative, and economic benefit. The cost of construction, while high initially, was amortized over so many years that the annual cost was minimal. Meanwhile, the benefits accrued continuously. Every day, military units moved faster, supplies reached their destinations more reliably, merchants conducted trade more efficiently, and administrative control was maintained more effectively. The maintenance requirements were significant but manageable. Roman roads needed drainage system clearing to remove vegetation and debris that could clog culverts. Paving stones that shifted or broke needed replacement. Surfaces that rutted from traffic needed regrading. But the well-engineered foundation meant that these maintenance tasks were relatively minor compared to reconstructing roads built with inferior techniques. Local authorities responsible for maintenance found the investment worthwhile because roads facilitated local trade and travel as much as they served imperial military purposes. The psychological impact of roads on conquered peoples was substantial. The roads were physical demonstrations of Roman power and permanence. A stone-paved road, arrow straight across the landscape, built to specifications that would last centuries. Such infrastructure proclaimed that Rome intended to stay, that Roman control was permanent, that resistance was futile because Rome had the resources and commitment to build lasting works throughout conquered territory. The roads were propaganda as much as infrastructure. For travelers in the ancient world, Roman roads were transformative. Journey times became predictable. A merchant could calculate exactly when goods would reach market. An official could schedule meetings confident of arriving on time. A courier could reliably cover 50 miles per day by changing horses at posting stations, allowing messages to travel hundreds of miles in days. This predictability was itself revolutionary in a world where travel times normally varied wildly based on weather, season, and random obstacles. The posting station system, the cursus publicus, extended road benefits to official communications. Stations were established at regular intervals, typically every 10-15 miles, where official couriers could change horses. This relay system allowed messages to travel at speeds impossible for individual messengers. An urgent message could travel 150 miles in a day using the posting stations, compared to perhaps 30-40 miles for a single courier. The system enabled rapid communication across the empire, allowing central authorities to remain informed of frontier conditions and to transmit orders quickly. The military applications of rapid communication were significant. A frontier commander facing invasion could send word to regional headquarters, and reinforcements could be ordered and dispatched within days. The coordination of multiple legions for combined operations was possible because commanders could communicate reliably and because they could predict exactly when their forces would reach designated positions. The predictability that roads created enabled military planning at a level of sophistication that would have been impossible otherwise. The legacy of Roman roads extended far beyond Rome's collapse. When the Western Roman Empire fell in the 5th century AD, the road network survived. Medieval kingdoms used Roman roads as major routes because no contemporary authority had the resources or expertise to build equivalent infrastructure. The roads built 500 to 1,000 years earlier remained superior to anything medieval engineers could construct. Modern highways in Europe often follow Roman routes because the Roman engineers chose optimal paths based on terrain, and those same paths remain optimal today. The engineering principles Roman road builders discovered or perfected remained relevant for 2,000 years. The importance of foundations, drainage, layered construction, cambered surfaces. These principles were rediscovered in the 18th and 19th centuries when European engineers began building modern roads. John Macadam and Thomas Telford, developing Macadam and Telford roads in the 1800s, were essentially rediscovering Roman techniques that had been lost during the medieval period. The Roman understanding that good roads required proper engineering rather than simple trail clearing remained valid across millennia. The strategic principle that infrastructure enables military operations remains central to modern military doctrine. Logistics determines what operations are possible. Mobility provides strategic advantage. Infrastructure that reduces friction in movement and supply multiplies combat power. These principles, proven by Roman roads 2,000 years ago, remain fundamental to military planning today. Modern militaries invest heavily in logistics infrastructure for the same reasons Rome invested in roads. Superior logistics enables operations that adversaries without similar infrastructure cannot match. The story of Roman roads is ultimately a story about the compound effects of infrastructure investment. Each road built enabled operations that were previously impossible. The network of roads enabled coordination and mobility across entire provinces. The benefits accumulated over decades and centuries, justifying the initial investment many times over. The roads meant that Roman military power could be projected rapidly and sustained at great distance, making Roman authority effectively inescapable within the empire and making Roman military responses to threats so rapid that preemptive action was nearly impossible. The Gauls, who laughed at Roman roads, misunderstood what infrastructure meant for military power. They saw elaborate construction and thought it wasteful. They didn't understand that the roads were force multipliers, that the investment in construction would pay dividends every day for centuries, that the ability to move armies 25 miles per day instead of 10 miles per day meant operations could be conducted in days that would otherwise require weeks. They learned this lesson when Roman legions appeared 200 miles away in 3 days, materializing from distance that should have guaranteed safety. The roads that seemed like monuments to Roman vanity proved to be instruments of Roman strategic dominance, enabling conquest and control through superior mobility that made Roman military power effectively omnipresent throughout their territories and able to respond to threats before enemies could consolidate positions or escape. The mathematics weren't written in marching speeds alone, but in the engineering specifications that made high speeds sustainable. In the drainage systems that kept roads passable year-round, in the standardized construction that made transit times predictable, in the network effects that made the system more valuable as it expanded, and in the strategic doctrine that prioritized infrastructure as force multiplier worthy of enormous investment. The legions that appeared 200 miles away in 3 days demonstrated that in warfare, logistics determines what's possible, and that an army with superior infrastructure can be anywhere before opponents without similar infrastructure can even comprehend that such mobility exists. The Gauls laughed at Roman roads until Roman legions taught them that the empire that controls movement controls the battlefield, and that in the long calculus of military power, roads matter as much as swords.